The bedroom reeks of incense and sweat, and an organic smell. A deep, guttural, almost animal voice fills the room. A woman is screaming about damnation, about flames eating away at her flesh. In the background, the priest's praying louder and louder as her body twists into impossible positions. Her parents are just watching from the corner, absolutely terrified but convinced this isn't their daughter anymore. Something else has taken control of her. Outside, everyone in the small town is sleeping, completely unaware of what's happening. By the time they finally called for help, the woman was already too far gone. Her knees were completely shattered. Her teeth had turned black. Her body was covered in wounds that nobody could stop. A body broken by something that no one understands. This is the exorcism of Anneliese Michel. Welcome to Fobia, a podcast about horror, true crime, and mysterious events. Stories from the darkest corners of imagination, history, and unexplained reality. Each week, we bring you a new horror fiction, a dark crime, or a documented mystery. Some stories stay with you long after they've ended, and that's okay. The good ones always do. I'm Corvin Ash, and this is Fobia. In 1976, a 23-year-old German woman died after enduring almost 70 exorcism sessions over a 10-month period. Anneliese Michel's death certificate simply listed the cause as starvation and dehydration. But the story behind what actually happened to her remains one of the most disturbing and controversial cases of supposed demonic possession we've seen in modern times. What makes this case particularly disturbing is just how recently it all happened. This wasn't medieval Europe when witch trials and exorcisms were normal. This was Germany in the 1970s, a time of breakthroughs in psychiatry and cutting-edge medical treatments. Yet somehow, a young woman died while priests tried to cast demons out of her body. When you look at photos of Anneliese before and after her ordeal, you're looking at two completely different people. In the earlier pictures, she's bright-eyed and full of life, with this shy smile and unmistakable energy. In those final photographs taken just before she died, her face is just skeletal, her eyes sunken with dark circles. Her expression is nothing but pure suffering. Was Anneliese mentally ill and was not treated properly? Or did something truly supernatural take over this young woman? Tonight, we're diving into this troubling case that's inspired countless horror films and religious debates, and asking what really happened in that small Bavarian town when faith, medicine, and something unexplainable all collided. Klingenberg am Main sits like a postcard in Bavaria. Church bells marking time, in a place where Catholic traditions run bone deep. Along the Main River, generations of families have lived where faith isn't just Sunday practice, but woven into daily life. This was Anneliese Michel's birthplace in 1952, born to parents who took their faith extremely seriously. The Michel house stood on a quiet street, traditional German house with dark wooden beams and window boxes, but behind this normal facade was complicated family history. Anna, Anneliese's mother, had a daughter out of wedlock before marrying Joseph Michel. That daughter, Martha, died before Anneliese was born. This shame, remember, this was 1950s, haunted the family, especially Anna, who transformed her guilt into extreme religious devotion. Joseph Michel, a carpenter, ran the household with rigid discipline. Prayer and penance weren't optional. They were daily requirements. Their brand of Catholicism was severe and uncompromising. Sins demanded punishment, and suffering held purifying power. Anna later told investigators she believed God had taken her first daughter as punishment for having a child outside of marriage. Into this atmosphere of religious intensity and unresolved guilt, Anneliese grew up alongside three sisters: Martha, named after the deceased child; Roswitha, and Barbara. Her early childhood appeared normal by all accounts. People described a happy, intelligent, deeply faithful girl. Photos show a smiling child with dark hair and bright eyes, typically surrounded by siblings or classmates. As a teenager, Anneliese attended secondary school in Aschaffenburg, making the daily bus journey from Klingenberg. She performed well academically, especially in handwriting and arts. Teachers described her as conscientious, polite, and reserved. Her diary entries from this period, later examined during the death investigation, show normal teenage concerns, though with more religious preoccupation than her peers. Anneliese attended Mass twice weekly, thought about becoming a teacher, and began dating Peter, whom she met at youth group. Their relationship remained chaste, reflecting both religious upbringing and the conservative environment of rural Bavaria. Peter remained with her till the end, even as her condition deteriorated. Friends described her as shy, but well-liked. She played piano and sang in church choir. Her bedroom contained religious icons alongside occasional posters of popular musicians, balancing devotion with normal adolescence. The first signs of trouble came in 1968, when Anneliese was 16. While sleeping, she felt intense pressure on her body, paralyzing her. She later said she was conscious but immobile, while an invisible force gripped her. Able to see and hear, but unable to move or scream. When she was finally free, she was terrified, convinced something supernatural was holding her down. Today, medical professionals would recognize sleep paralysis, where the body remains immobilized during sleep-wake transitions while consciousness returns, often accompanied by terrifying hallucinations. But for a devoutly religious teenager in 1960s rural Germany, this experience meant something else, something darker. Anneliese Michel was very concerned about her daughter's experience, but didn't seek medical help. Instead, she focused on prayer for all the family and talked to their parish priest, who told her not to worry and watch for further incidents like this. In 1969, the situation got much worse. Sitting in class at school, Anneliese suffered her first seizure without warning. She lost consciousness as her body stiffened, then convulsed. She urinated during the episode with no memory of it afterward. Classmates reacted with fear, and Anneliese felt deeply embarrassed by the public nature of the incident. This time, medical intervention became necessary. Doctors at the psychiatric clinic in Würzburg examined her and discovered abnormal brain activity. They diagnosed temporal lobe epilepsy, a condition causing hallucinations, personality changes, and convulsions. Her medical records show prescriptions for anticonvulsant medications, including Dilantin and Tegretol. These drugs can control seizures for many patients, but carry side effects: drowsiness, dizziness, sometimes mood alterations. For a teenage student, these side effects made things worse. In 1975, after nearly 6 years of medical treatment with little improvement, Joseph and Anneliese Michel approached their local priest about performing an exorcism. Their request was initially denied. The Catholic Church requires extensive evaluation before authorizing such a ritual. Evidence that conventional treatments have failed and that genuine demonic possession, not mental illness, is present. Since the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s, the Catholic Church had become cautious about attributing psychological symptoms to demonic forces. The official position encouraged thorough medical and psychiatric evaluation before considering spiritual intervention. But Anneliese's behavior had become increasingly strange in ways beyond medical explanation. She was speaking in languages she'd never studied, including ancient dialects that language experts would later identify as forms of Aramaic and ancient Greek. During episodes, her voice would become low, deep, becoming almost masculine, or inhuman. Witnesses said she displayed superhuman strength during episodes, once breaking a wooden crucifix with her bare hands, and, on another occasion, throwing her sister Roswitha across a room despite Anneliese's increasingly weak physical state. The most frightening part was the voices. At least 6 distinct entities were heard speaking through her, including what appears to be Judas Iscariot, Nero, Hitler, Cain, Lucifer, and a damned priest from the 16th century. Each voice had distinct speech patterns, knowledge, and personalities. The Hitler entity spoke with rage about the failure of the Third Reich. Judas lamented his betrayal of Christ. Lucifer spoke in riddles and made theological arguments against Catholic doctrine. The damned priest confessed to sexual transgressions and failing his priestly duties. The family recorded many of these episodes on a portable tape recorder. The tapes, which still exist today, are deeply disturbing. On them, you can hear a voice that doesn't sound remotely like the young woman's normal speech. It roars, it threatens, it blasphemes in growly tones that seem to come from something inhuman. Between these outbursts are moments of clarity where Anneliese, in her normal voice, would beg for help or express fears about what was happening to her. Ernst Alt, a local priest who had become involved with the family, began to visit the Michel home regularly. After witnessing Anneliese's condition firsthand, he became convinced that demonic forces were at work. He petitioned Bishop Joseph Stangl of Würzburg, providing detailed accounts of Anneliese's symptoms and the failure of medical interventions. Bishop Stangl was hesitant. He consulted with several theologians and medical experts before making his decision. Finally, in September 1975, he granted permission for the Rituale Romanum, the Catholic exorcism rite, to be performed. 2 priests were assigned: Father Arnold Renz, an experienced exorcist from a nearby district, and Father Alt himself. The first official exorcism session took place on September 24, 1975. It would be the first of 67 sessions, spanning nearly 10 months. The ritual followed the traditional Catholic format: prayers, readings from scripture, commands for the demons to identify themselves and depart, and liberal use of holy water and blessed objects. These sessions typically lasted several hours and occurred once or twice weekly. Peter, Anneliese's boyfriend, witnessed many of these sessions. He later described how she would have to be restrained during the ritual, how her body would contort unnaturally, sometimes assuming positions that seemed physically impossible, including her head touching her back while kneeling. He reported that she would refuse food because the demons would not allow her to eat, and that during lucid moments between exorcism sessions, Anneliese would express a desire to suffer for the wayward youth of the day and for apostate priests. The priests documented that Anneliese would sometimes speak directly about people's sins or secrets that she couldn't have known naturally. Father Alt reported that she once addressed him about a confessional matter he had never disclosed to anyone. These incidents reinforced their belief that they were dealing with supernatural forces, or demons, rather than mental illness. As the months progressed, Anneliese's physical condition deteriorated dramatically. She broke her knees from compulsive kneeling during prayers. The medical examiner would later note that the cartilage was completely destroyed. Her face became unrecognizable, gaunt and full of self-inflicted wounds. Her teeth darkened and began to decay. She refused most food and water, claiming the demons forbade it. The exorcism sessions grew more intense. The recordings from later sessions reveal a progressive weakening in Anneliese's voice, though the demonic entities continued to manifest with apparent strength. The priests interpreted this as evidence that the demons were gradually losing their hold, but becoming more desperate in their resistance. During this period, Anneliese stopped taking her anti-seizure medication entirely. The family later claimed this was on instruction from the priests, who believed the medication interfered with the exorcism process. The priests, however, would testify that they had never explicitly advised against medication, but had focused on spiritual remedies. By April 1976, Anneliese was severely malnourished. She had developed pneumonia from her weakened state, but refused hospitalization. Dr. Richard Roth, who was asked by the priests to examine her during this period, would later testify that he recognized her dire physical condition, but was told by the priests that the exorcism was working, that the deterioration was a sign the demons were weakening. Dr. Roth prescribed antibiotics for the pneumonia and strongly recommended hospitalization. His advice was not followed. This medical consultation would later become a crucial point in the legal proceedings. Evidence that medical professionals had been consulted, but their advice was ignored in favor of the exorcism process. By June 1976, Anneliese was skinny to the point of skeletal appearance. She could barely walk and spoke only during possession episodes or in brief lucid moments between them. Her family claims that in her final days, she spoke of martyrdom. She reportedly told them, "Mother, I'm afraid, but also, I will free young people." On July 1st, 1976, Anneliese Michel died in her home. The exorcism had been scheduled to continue that day, but instead, emergency medical services were finally called. They arrived to find her already deceased. The autopsy revealed extreme malnutrition, dehydration, and pneumonia as the primary causes of death. She weighed just 68 pounds. What followed shocked Germany and soon captivated international attention. The priests and Anneliese's parents were charged with negligent homicide. Prosecutors argued they had abandoned medical treatment in favor of religious ritual, allowing a clearly ill young woman to starve to death while under their care. The trial of Anneliese's parents and the two priests became a national sensation in Germany. The courtroom in Aschaffenburg was packed daily with journalists, religious observers, medical professionals, and curious citizens. What unfolded was not just a legal proceeding, but a philosophical debate about the boundaries between faith and science, responsibility and belief. Prosecutors presented a straightforward case. Anneliese had suffered from epilepsy and mental illness, potentially schizophrenia or dissociative identity disorder. Without proper medical care and nutrition, she had died a preventable death. They brought in neurologists and psychiatrists who testified that her symptoms, even the most bizarre ones, could be explained through known medical conditions. Medical experts testified that many of Anneliese's symptoms aligned perfectly with known conditions. The demonic languages were likely glossolalia, a phenomenon common in certain psychological states where a person speaks in what sounds like a language but follows no actual linguistic rules. Some of the ancient languages she supposedly spoke were analyzed by linguists, who noted they contained grammatical errors and modern phrases that wouldn't have existed in ancient times. Her superhuman strength could be explained by the adrenaline surge that often accompanies seizures and psychotic episodes. Even her religious preoccupations were consistent with temporal lobe epilepsy, which frequently manifests as hyper-religiosity, an intense focus on religious themes and symbols. The prosecution emphasized that Anneliese had been responding to medication before the exorcism began. Her medical records showed periods of improvement when she adhered to her prescription regimen. They argued that the religious suggestion of demonic possession had created a self-fulfilling prophecy, exacerbating her symptoms and giving her hallucinations a specific framework. Neurologist Dr. Hans Pennin testified that Anneliese had been in a self-perpetuating psychosis. triggered by her epilepsy but sustained by the suggestion of possession. The exorcism, he argued, had reinforced her delusions rather than treating the underlying condition. He explained how the brain, particularly when compromised by neurological disorders, is highly susceptible to suggestion. The defense presented a different perspective. They brought forward the audio recordings of the exorcism sessions, the inhuman voices, the knowledge of events Anneliese couldn't have known, the fluency in languages she'd never studied. They argued that medicine had failed her long before the exorcism began. For nearly 6 years, she had received conventional treatment with little improvement. They called witnesses who testified to phenomena that seemed beyond medical explanation. Objects moving on their own in her presence, a horrific smell that would suddenly fill rooms she occupied, a smell that multiple, independent witnesses described as the odor of something burning, like electrical wires or sulfur. Her ability to identify blessed objects versus non-blessed ones while blindfolded. Father Alt testified about incidents where Anneliese revealed knowledge she couldn't possibly have known, including private details about people she had never met and events that had occurred before her birth. He believed these constituted evidence of unusual knowledge that couldn't be explained by epilepsy or mental illness. Joseph and Anneliese Michel testified about their daughter's suffering and their desperate attempts to help her. They described how conventional medicine had seemed to make her worse, not better, and how they had only turned to exorcism as a last resort. Their testimony was emotional and compelling, the story of parents watching their child deteriorate while medical science offered no solutions. The trial raised uncomfortable questions about religious freedom and medical ethics. At what point does a person's right to refuse treatment, or a parent's right to choose treatment for their child, end? What obligations do religious officials have when confronted with medical emergencies? Can spiritual care and medical care coexist, or must one always subordinate to the other? The Catholic Church maintained an uncomfortable position throughout the trial. While they had authorized the exorcism, they now emphasized that medical care should have continued alongside spiritual intervention. This middle ground satisfied neither side, but reflected the Church's evolving stance on such matters. The German public was divided. Some saw the case as medical negligence, cloaked in superstition, an example of how dangerous religious extremism could be. Letters to newspapers called for stricter regulation of religious practices and mandatory medical care, regardless of religious objections. Others, particularly in more religious communities, believed Anneliese had indeed been possessed, that her suffering was spiritual warfare made visible. They saw the trial as persecution of faithful Catholics who had tried to help a young woman when medicine had failed her. Psychiatrists later suggested that Anneliese may have suffered from a complex combination of conditions: epilepsy that damaged her temporal lobe, leading to psychosis, which was then shaped by her religious upbringing into a conviction of demonic possession. This cultural overlay theory explains how the same underlying conditions might manifest as possession in a Catholic community, but as alien abduction or government conspiracy in different cultural contexts. The trial concluded in April 1978, nearly 2 years after Anneliese's death. The court ultimately found the parents and priests guilty of negligent homicide. They received suspended sentences and probation, a verdict that acknowledged wrongdoing, but also recognized they had acted out of conviction rather than malice. Following the trial, the Catholic Church in Germany revised its guidelines for exorcism, emphasizing the need for medical evaluation and ongoing medical care during any spiritual intervention. Bishop Stangl, who had authorized the exorcism, expressed regret about the outcome, but maintained that spiritual forces had been at work in Anneliese's case. Nearly 50 years after Anneliese Michel's death, her case continues to raise questions that go beyond the law and into philosophy. theology, and the limits of human understanding. The central mystery remains resistant to any clear-cut explanation. If this was simply untreated mental illness, why did years of psychiatric treatment and anticonvulsant medications fail to help? Medical records show Anneliese received state-of-the-art treatment for her time, yet her condition steadily worsened. Was this simply a case of misdiagnosis, or was something happening that went beyond the medical framework entirely? Yet if this was genuine possession, why would demonic entities flee only after their host had died of starvation? The traditional understanding of exorcism suggests that successful rituals result in the possessed person's recovery, not their death. Did Anneliese die because the exorcism failed? Or was her death somehow part of the process of liberation from possession? Some researchers have suggested a middle path, that Anneliese suffered from both medical and spiritual conditions simultaneously. They point to the Catholic concept of oppression versus possession, where genuine illness can create vulnerabilities that spiritual forces exploit. This perspective allows for both medical and religious interpretations to coexist, though it satisfies purists on neither side. The case had profound impacts on various institutions. The Catholic Church's approach to exorcism evolved significantly following Anneliese's death. While the ritual remains part of official practice, the Church now requires extensive medical evaluation before authorizing exorcism, and insists that medical treatment continue concurrently with any spiritual intervention. In medical circles, the case has been studied as an example of how cultural context shapes the expression and treatment of illness. It has informed approaches to culturally sensitive psychiatric care, where practitioners recognize that effective treatment must account for a patient's beliefs and worldview. For the legal system, the case established important precedents about the limits of religious freedom when health is at stake. Courts in many jurisdictions now use similar reasoning when addressing cases where religious practices conflict with medical necessity. Many questions remain, and will remain unanswered. How could a young woman speak languages she never studied? Why did multiple independent witnesses report the same supernatural phenomena? Objects moving, the sulfuric smell, temperature changes in the room during episodes. What explains the voices on the recordings? Audio experts said that these voices would be extremely difficult to fake, particularly the layered voices that seem to speak simultaneously. Anneliese's parents maintained, until their deaths, that their daughter had been possessed, and that the exorcism, though unsuccessful in saving her life, had freed her soul. Father Alt gave interviews years later, expressing both certainty about Anneliese's possession and regret about her death. He maintained that while medical care should have continued, the spiritual dimension of her suffering was real and required spiritual intervention. The house where Anneliese spent her final days still stands in Klingenberg. The recorded tapes of her exorcism remain locked away, too disturbing for casual listening. Those who have heard them in full describe being affected for days afterwards. Anneliese once wrote in her diary, "Before her condition deteriorated, I fear what lives inside me, but I fear more that no one will believe it's real." This tension between the subjective experience of suffering and the objective assessment of its causes defines her story. If we put aside the possibility of demons, we are left with the certainty of her suffering. In the space between science and faith, a young woman experienced something that destroyed her. Whether we call it illness or possession, the terror in her voice on those recordings is undeniably real. I am Corvin Ash, and this was Fobia, where stories move between reality and nightmare. Thank you for walking this path with me. If you liked this episode, consider following the show or leaving a review. It helps more than you know. You can find Fobia on social media at Fobia Podcast for a glimpse of what's coming next, or to share your own most unsettling stories. Next week, we'll return with something new, a dark case, a mind-bending mystery, or a blood-chilling story. Whatever it is, it will stay with you. Until then, stay safe